So this is a webinar to talk about the Life During COVID-19 McAuliffe 7th Grade Photovoice project. To begin with, if we were done doing this live, we would have talked about who we were, your name, the house you're in, and think for a moment about if you could go any place right now, where would it be? And if you could eat any food right now, what would it be? And then think a little bit about why this sounded interesting to you. Everybody has their own reasons for choosing to do this. What were your reasons? These are some examples from another Photovoice project. This one was about addictions. It can be a little bit hard to read, so I'll read them out loud. The first photo on the left is of a park and a sign. It says, "This is Skyline Park. It has a baseball field, a basketball court, and a playground with a gazebo. As per most parks, there's a sign with rules and regulations along with consequences for breaking those rules. What you don't see is the place where most addicts drank their first beer, smoked their first joint, or shot up for the first time. In high school, this was where we came to hang out, which meant drink or do drugs. When you said you were going to Skyline Park, your friends knew what you were going to do there, regardless of the sign. After it became known to most parents what actually went on at this park, I was no longer allowed to hang out there after school, and most importantly, after dark. From experience, cops have driven by, telling us to get lost, but we never did. It was dark. We just quieted down. Enforcement of these rules and regulations may have deterred some people from using for their first time. When I was a teenager, I would have said it was lame when a cop would tell us to leave, but now I wish they had done more than that, especially for some of my friends." The second one, it's hard to see, but it's a wall, and you can see the light coming in. It says, "What used to be a creative way of publicly celebrating birthdays and igniting team spirit has become a billboard for the latest overdose victim. This once fun local tradition has evolved into a depressing reminder of the loved ones we have lost. The blank wall represents not knowing who will be next." So for yours, you can choose to take photos of whatever is meaningful to you in this time, whatever shows some sort of meaning. It can be edgy, it can be a little more straightforward. You get to decide. The point of it is to express what your experience is. And if you're not sure if a photo is appropriate or not, I encourage you to take the photo and then bring it to the group, and we'll talk about it and decide if it's something that you want to post or if it's something you want to just have taken for yourself. But the point is that you'll notice that there's the photos and then there's the description of it. The description includes a little bit of a description of the photo as well as the meaning behind the photo for the artist. So think about those pieces because that's some of what you'll be including in your artist statement when you get to that point. The next piece you want to think about is ethics. So making sure that the choices you're making in your photography are ethical. So the first one on here, obtain informed consent. So this means that people need to consent to participation. Specifically, it's a picture of someone who's recognizable, like if you can see their face, if it's a specific tattoo, taking a picture of anyone who's under the age of 18, a minor, taking a picture of somebody's personal belongings or personal property. You need consent for that. You want to think about people's privacy. You don't need a picture for a public figure. You don't need consent for a picture of a public figure. You don't need consent for public settings, and you don't need consent for somebody who can't be specifically identified. So if it's somebody's feet or somebody from behind and they're not wearing something totally recognizable, those are times when you might not need consent. It might be hard sometimes to get consent right now because of the situation. So thinking about if you can recreate a photo as needed. So if there's something you see happen and you can't get consent from that person, having someone you can get consent from recreate that photo, that's totally fine. You want to make sure you're protecting participants. So you don't want to put yourself in a dangerous position or anyone who might be a subject of your photo in a dangerous position. So right now that would certainly include making sure you're following the social distancing or physical distancing guidelines. But you also want to think about making sure people aren't making choices that are illegal or might make them look really bad. You don't want to mess up anyone's reputation. You don't want to get anyone in trouble with the law. That matters a lot. So making sure that you and anyone in your photos, that you're protecting them. You want to protect the community, so making sure that you're, again, not doing anything that's going to make the community overall look bad, and make sure that situations are portrayed accurately. So if it's a real thing that's happening, you can take a photo of that, but don't maybe create a really negative situation just to take a photo of it. Again, if you're not sure if this works, if a photo works, take the photo, bring it to the group, and we can talk about it and decide as a group if this is authentic and valuable and meets those ethical guidelines, okay? So making sure that it accurately represents a situation. Not all situations are beautiful and happy. You may be taking photos that are representing really difficult, painful situations, and that's the situation that you're in. And so it's okay to take those pictures while still following these guidelines. Let's talk a little bit about photography tips. So the first one is making sure it stands out. If you look at this photo, the first thing that your eye is drawn to for most of us is that sticker on the pole in the foreground. So making sure that whatever you're taking a picture of is that you're focusing on that thing and that that's really visible, that you don't have a ton of clutter around it, or if you wanted somebody to focus in on this picture, this sticker, having a group of people standing around it would distract the attention. So choosing how it is you want to stage your photo so the thing you're focusing in on is really clear. Make sure that it stands out so that you can focus in on the message you're trying to communicate. You also want to think about color. Color can really play on emotion, and it means different things to different people, different things culturally, and so that's okay if something that means something to you isn't what it means to everybody else. That's fine. Like red in this picture, it might mean passion, it might mean anger, it might mean that it's just really visible. It depends, but making sure you're keeping in mind color. Black and white photography makes things look really different than something with color in it. Having a black background with a pop of color in it makes that pop really stand out differently than having something that has tons of colors. So thinking about how you want to stage it, what are the colors, what they mean to you, and how other people might interpret them is worth thinking. It's worth thinking about. You want to think about perspective too. When you're looking at these photos, they're of essentially the same thing, right? The earth moving equipment, but the perspective is really, really different. So the one on the left, it's hard to tell what you're supposed to be focusing in on. Is it the construction site over it all? Is it the person standing there watching it? It could be any of those. Whereas the one on the right, it's really clear that it's that earth moving equipment. It's a low down viewpoint, which changes how you're seeing it. It might make it feel more threatening or bigger. Think about the perspective of a child, like that a child might have. When you were younger, you were shorter, and so you had to look up at the world more. Think about the perspective of somebody who's in power or is physically large or up above things, and you can play with perspective that way in your photos. So it's just something to keep in mind. It can help you see the world differently, and it can help you portray your message differently by changing that perspective. And then finally, the rule of thirds. So in the rule of thirds, you want to make sure that a photo is interesting no matter what, even if the subject matter isn't something that somebody knows. You want to make sure it's visually appealing. So the rule of thirds means if you were to picture dividing a photo into thirds from top to bottom and from left to right, having your subject line up with the where those lines would intersect, that's the rule of thirds. It helps to just create that visually pleasing photography. If you go back and look at, for example, this color one, that cup is in that area. Same thing with the one about it standing out, that pole and sticker are in that third. So not necessarily centering things in the middle of a photo, even though often many of us take photos that way, but to create some visual interest by trying to remember the rule of thirds. Okay, so those are just a few photography tips. You can choose to follow them, you can choose to not. It's your photo and you can decide, but trying to make it the most effective photo you can make it so that your message is being communicated as effectively as possible. Acknowledging that you'll get to write about it, you'll get to speak about it, and making the photo itself as effective as possible, even if it didn't have words attached to it. It is really important to follow those ethical guidelines. It's really important to make sure that participants are safe, that you have consent. I will upload a form to the Schoology group so that you can take a look at that and use that to get the consent for somebody in the photo, if you were to take a photo of somebody who would be recognizable. If you can't print it, that's totally fine. You can always have the person write out the language in it and submit it that way, just so that you have that. But it's really important that you have that and that we have that as a school so that we know that the consent exists for the photo. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. There were some questions about using photo editing software, and so that's, I think, totally fine to use as long as, again, it still fits those ethical guidelines. You might even use it to make sure somebody's identity is obscured, but making sure you're not changing it so that people can't be recognizable, or so that people look worse than they really are. Still following the ethical guidelines, but I think it's fine to use that. There's certainly many free apps that you can use, or free software you can use for photo editing. If you need suggestions for those, many of the other group members have good ideas for that. I know one of them was Pixlr, I think. I'll double check what that one's called, and post that in the group. But there are plenty of options that you can use for photo editing. And if you have any other questions, please send a message. You can post it in the group, or you can send a message directly via Schoology, whatever works for you. And then this information comes from the Facilitator's Toolkit for a Photovoice project from United for Prevention in Passaic County. And there's a link where you to be interested in looking that up. But just to give credit to where this information came from. If you have any questions, please do reach out. Really excited to continue on this Photovoice project. Have a great day.